discover the unique, utterly delicious golden moments from Ferrero Rocher.
Will you, Diane? Sorry. Now take a deep breath, count up to 10 and answer the only question that matters. Do you love me?
I adore you. Sorry.
Well, that's right. Like,
Do you mind?
Sorry.
let's have one solid thing in this rush world of theirs. Something that will last forever and ever.
American-grown peanuts. Music to your taste buds.
Capital City. It only takes seconds to win or lose a fortune. Buy or sell, the decision is yours. Tuesdays at 9 on Central. It takes more than nerve to succeed.
Here in the heart of Britain, you're watching Central.
London's ambulance service paralysed by pay dispute. Police step in, but the action could spread. Engineering firms face crippling strikes over hours. Mrs. Thatcher says she's appalled by criticisms over South Africa. And 100,000 go on the march in Leipzig tonight. Good evening. The population of London is almost entirely dependent tonight on a makeshift ambulance service provided by the police and volunteers. Ambulance men in South Wales and in Scotland say they'll step up their action within days. The first day of a London work to rule, on top of the national overtime ban over pay, closed nearly every ambulance station in the capital. There were soon more than 3 million people in South London without emergency cover. The first sit-in at the Oval spread rapidly across the South West Division and then the South East. By midday, 24 ambulance stations out of London's 71 were not working, and the police had answered their first 10 emergency calls. By afternoon, half the stations weren't working, including some crews north of the Thames. The police had then dealt with 45 emergencies, including road accident victims, people with heart attacks, and a woman having a baby. Tonight, 61 stations, nearly 90%, are out, and the police have gone to deal with more than 300 emergency calls.
As this dispute escalated, the police have been responding all day to calls referred from the London Ambulance Service. During the day, the police dealt with drugs overdoses like this one, people hurt in traffic accidents, injured children, and women going into labour.
That was the fifth one. We've had some heart attack, epileptic fits. This one's an overdose. Quite busy, yeah.
Whereabouts have you come from?
We are based at Tooting. We're taking patients from Battersea, Putney, Wandsworth.
So you're covering quite a large area today?
We are, yes. Working very hard.
30 police vans and 75 police cars provided an emergency service to replace 170 ambulances, most of which remained idle throughout the day. Even this afternoon, when some crews were still working, often alongside the police, London's ambulance headquarters were admitting they were in real difficulty.
Would it be fair to describe ambulance cover in the capital now as a shambles?
Yes, I think it would be a fair assumption. If you've got 45 of 71 ambulance stations that are not prepared to work, then it has to be, just as you describe it.
In most stations in London, crews have been sitting in after colleagues had been suspended for refusing to carry out routine work. But they insist they are ready to answer emergency calls.
If the management would allow us to operate our ambulances, put back the ignition keys that management took out the ambulances this morning, we'll go back to work.
But the management say they can't accept the ambulance men's preconditions, like restricted use of their radios.
80% of my operational mobilising is done by radio. I've got to have that radio working properly.
A hospital consultant has been trying to limit the emergency calls today.
If I could get more medical details, for instance, from the general practitioner or from the patient themselves, it makes it easier to decide whether it needs a 999 blue light call or whether it could be delayed for 2 hours or more.
With their properly equipped ambulances, the regular crews who've been working today have had a much easier time handling patients. The police did their best, but their vans simply aren't equipped to make moving a sick person easy for the patient or the police. Union conveners will meet tomorrow to decide their next moves. David Rose, News at 10, London.
Simon Cole is at the headquarters of the London Ambulance Service now. Simon, how much worse are they expecting things to get as the night goes on?
Monday night is traditionally a quiet night, Alistair. The only difference tonight is that there's a shift change at 11 o'clock. As we saw this afternoon on that shift change, things escalated quite dramatically. And as you've said, something like 90% of the ambulance stations aren't working at the moment. There is a fear that that could get worse tonight with the shift change, which happens in about an hour's time.
The talks earlier on, first attempt to resolve this part of the dispute at least, only lasted an hour. How serious is the effort to bring this dispute to an end?
I think the effort's very serious, but both sides do appear to be deadlocked. I suggested to both sides this afternoon that they were being pig-headed. They both denied it, which suggests that they maybe are being pig-headed. But there was a lot of emotion in tonight's meeting. During the talks, ambulancemen said that some of the senior members had tears in their eyes as they saw the ambulance service collapsing around them.
Simon Cole, thank you very much indeed. Trevor.
The ambulance unions say the government's using them as a political football and at the patient's expense. The Health Secretary, before he walked out of a television interview on the dispute, said the unions were the ones who were putting people's lives at risk.
Tonight it's the government's case that the ambulance dispute is a simple, straightforward pay dispute and that it's the unions who are behaving irresponsibly. On a visit to Nottinghamshire, Health Secretary Kenneth Clarke made the point.
The ambulancemen, their union, NUPE, is choosing not to take part in negotiations which the management wish to continue. And I'm sure most people don't want to see industrial action against patients in the National Health Service when talks are on offer.
Mr. Clarke's annoyance with the unions became even clearer as he was pressed. When will the dispute end?
NUPE are organising it. You must ask NUPE. They're gambling with patient safety in the interests of a pay claim. And I don't approve of that. Management are offering talks to them.
Doesn't there come a point when you intervene, though, Secretary of State?
I am not negotiating. It's the unions who refuse me.
But at Westminster tonight, Labour is certain that the government will have to explain a rapidly worsening situation to the Commons tomorrow.
I find it very difficult to believe that the police, with the best will in the world, can provide adequate emergency cover for the whole of London with a score of vans, equipped only with a stretcher and without the skilled training and equipment which the ambulancemen have to carry out resuscitation.
Despite the government's hands-off line, the Health Service Chief Executive confirmed tonight that he did talk to Mr. Clarke yesterday.
The Secretary of State expects me, as Chief Executive of the National Health Service, to manage this matter on his behalf. I expect to do that. That's my job.
So you just told him what you intended to do? You didn't get any advice from him?
I told him what the circumstances were. I told him what the London plan was. I told him that we might well have to implement that plan tomorrow.
But tonight, government sources are insisting that the level of emergency ambulance cover in London and elsewhere is adequate and that there are no plans to bring in military ambulances or troops. Michael Brunson, News at 10 at the Department of Health.
More than 7,000 engineering workers at British Aerospace and Rolls-Royce are being called out on indefinite strike from Monday. The action is over their claim for a 35-hour working week for 2 million workers throughout the industry. The strike was called after a ballot of manual workers narrowly approved industrial action at 7 key plants. White-collar workers rejected the call. The strikes will hit British Aerospace plants at Preston and Chester, as well as the Rolls-Royce factory at Hillingdon in Glasgow, unless talks can settle the claim.
The union strategy is to pick off the most vulnerable targets. The 3 aerospace factories which turned in the only overall votes for action, white-collar and manual, are the ones selected for the first wave of stoppages. Meanwhile, other key engineering firms, including Lucas and GKN, are being targeted for fresh strike ballots. The unions claim spectacular increases in productivity justify the demand. What they're seeking is a 4-hour cut to a 35-hour week, no loss of earnings to compensate, and a substantial pay rise and other concessions. But the employers say a cut to 37.5 hours in 3 separate annual stages, together with 6% on basic pay, is all the industry can afford. Announcing the ballot result, the manual unions said they were delighted and maintained that a week was long enough to settle the dispute.
After 8 months of negotiation, the engineering employers know the differences between us, and we are of the opinion that a week is a very long time in which to conclude a negotiated settlement.
Rolls-Royce, among the strike targets, predicts the effects will be swift and very damaging.
Our competitors are constantly improving efficiency. We are constantly trying to improve efficiency. So it's living in fool's paradise to think that we can just throw efficiency away. We will go out of business so fast it wouldn't be true.
Employees at Rolls' American competitors are still working a 40-hour week. Compared with the major industrial countries, Britain's in the middle. America and Japan both retain the traditional 40-hour week. Britain is on 39, with France slightly lower on 38.5, and Germany on 37. The effects of the German reduction are disputed here. The union saying it's created thousands of jobs, employers saying higher costs reduce employment. The unions have amassed a £12 million war chest to fight the claim, though most members appear to accept that a 35-hour week is a long-term target.
Mrs. Thatcher at the Commonwealth Summit in Malaysia is tonight standing firmly by her independent line on measures against South Africa. The Prime Minister said she was appalled and amazed at criticism from other Commonwealth leaders about her separate British statement on sanctions. Tomorrow, the heads of government will discuss a call for the forcible repatriation of Vietnamese boat people from Hong Kong and Malaysia.
As Commonwealth leaders filed into dinner to mark the closing stages of what has been a pretty ill-tempered conference, their officials were putting the finishing touches to a communiqué which will summarise their views on a whole range of international issues. According to a confidential copy of the communiqué obtained by ITN, the conference will, among other things, call for the repatriation of the Vietnamese boat people unless they're genuine refugees. It will call for the creation of an international criminal court to help deal with drug cases, and in terms rather weaker than those wished for by Britain, it will suggest that everyone should help to maintain the prosperity of Hong Kong. Of these issues, it's the repatriation of the Vietnamese boat people which is the most immediate concern, because the size of the problem grows with every day. And John Major today confirmed that the refugees may be forced to return to Vietnam.
At present, we are still trying to persuade people voluntarily to leave Hong Kong. The problem there is absolutely intense, and it is getting worse. And I cannot rule out the possibility of non-voluntary return at some future stage. But at present, no such decision has been made, and we are continuing to seek voluntary return by those boat people in Hong Kong.
Earlier, Mrs. Thatcher found herself in direct conflict with two of Britain's closest Commonwealth partners, Australia and Canada. The Prime Ministers of both countries complained bitterly at the way the British signed a communiqué on South Africa, then immediately issued another statement saying why they didn't agree with Commonwealth policy. The Canadian Prime Minister told her, you don't sign an agreement at 5 and repudiate it at 6.
Mrs. Thatcher proposed its acceptance. I seconded it. That everyone concluded that this was the position of the Commonwealth. Not a word was said beyond that, and we went home. And when we arrived home, we found out there was a second position.
Mrs. Thatcher was unrepentant, indeed furious at the criticism. Aides said she was amazed the Commonwealth found free speech so inconvenient.
The communiqué that came out last night on South Africa said quite clearly in several places, Britain takes a different view. I spelled out that different view.
So another conference dominated by South Africa draws to an end with Mrs. Thatcher on one side and the 48 Commonwealth countries on the other. Peter Allen, News at 10, Kuala Lumpur.
Here, the government is to freeze the level of child benefit for the third successive year. ITN has learned that the new Social Security Secretary, Mr. Tony Newton, has lost his battle with the Treasury to have the benefit increased. It stayed at the rate of £7.25 a week since 1986. Tonight, the Child Poverty Action Group described the government's continued failure to upgrade the benefit in line with inflation as very disturbing.
Thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators are marching in East Germany tonight. The main protest is in Leipzig, where more than 100,000 people are on the streets. In East Berlin, workers at an electronics plant have formed an independent trade union similar to the Solidarity movement in Poland. From Leipzig, Ian Glover-James has sent us this report.
Thousands of demonstrators were again on the streets of Leipzig tonight, but this time it was different. In an extraordinary step, East German television broadcast these pictures first, within an hour of crowds gathering. They said 100,000 were demonstrating and allowed one organizer to tell viewers at home about their demands for democracy.
These street demonstrations have been more or less spontaneous, and the authorities have learned that they run the more calm, the more peaceful, the less they try to prevent them.
And in another sign of change in East Germany, the new Forum opposition group, still banned by the authorities, today met to document police attacks on demonstrators. In the back row, a security man listened and took notes. Then a state prosecutor appeared to answer the charges. Despite his hardline reputation, East Germany's new leader is encouraging dialogue to defuse his country's crisis. Egon Krenz is now talking about some of the freedoms the demonstrators are demanding. But no one here believes Mr. Krenz is a German Gorbachev, and his chances of delivering genuine reforms must remain negligible. Ian Glover-James, News at 10 in East Berlin.
An international conference on the fight against the drugs trade opens in Madrid tomorrow. Spain is thought to be one of the main European gateways for South American drugs. What Spanish customs are doing to keep hard drugs out, a report in part 2. Plus, the sisters wrongly accused by Tesco get extra damages. And the jockeys take a cautious look at the redesigned Becher's Brook. That's in a couple of minutes.
How to do it all, do it? Week in, week out, the Do It All computer price checks over 200 different DIY prices and gives you this price promise. If you find anything cheaper elsewhere, we'll refund the difference. Price check. That's how Do It All do it.
Now the price of this sharp typewriter has fallen by £20. The price of this Boots car seat by £6. And this answering machine's under £50. It's well worth dropping into Boots this autumn.
Every year, hundreds of thousands of car engines wear out prematurely. And every year, a contributory cause can be the choice of oil. Esso Superlube Plus helps keep an engine running smoothly through thick and thin, constantly protecting the engine against the final day of reckoning. Esso Superlube Plus. No other oil does more to keep your engine running the way it should.
Getting the OK to a loan outside banking hours can be tricky. Of course, if you bank with Girobank, you can do all your banking direct, by phone, post, and cash dispenser. You can even arrange a loan by phone, up to 8 at night. Girobank, a bank with fewer hold-ups.
Colombian government officials will tomorrow take part in a conference in Madrid on how to curb the international drugs trade. Spain is one of the main entry points for South American drugs into Europe, and although anti-smuggling patrols have been increased, it's proving impossible to police the entire coastline. We have the first of two special reports. Tonight, Peter Sharp reports from Vigo on Spain's northwest coast on the efforts to trap the traffickers.
The sleepy little marina at Vigo is just one of dozens of harbours along this rocky shoreline that's now taken on a strategic significance in Europe's fight against Colombia's drug cartel. The Spanish customs have been patrolling these waters for 2 centuries. Smuggling's always been a way of life on these waters. Cigarettes from Gibraltar, hashish from Morocco. Now it's cocaine. Last year, Spanish police seized 3.5 tons of the drug. It's estimated 40% of Europe's cocaine arrives through Spain. According to the French, it's become the open mouth of Europe. Customs fear the existing fish packing industry could provide cover for moving the drug through Europe. This truckload of frozen squid is bound for Italy, and with its custom seals in place, can pass freely through international frontiers. The police have now introduced drug patrols to back up the customs. The villagers call this Falcon Crest. It's the home of a suspected smuggler. The drugs are now the architecture of the Medellin cartel introduced to northern Spain. Last month, the authorities imposed travel restrictions on the fast speedboats used to smuggle drugs, and those too are monitored each evening by the civil police. But most of the smugglers' boats have now moved down the coast into Portugal. We found these three moored at Viana do Castelo, the small launches, each powered by 5 300-horsepower engines. Aboard the larger vessel, the Greek captain denied his involvement in the drugs trade.
We're not doing that. For this, in my boat is free, everybody to come to see if it's possible to do like that. But for the other two, don't believe me, I don't know nothing.
You're not a cocaine smuggler?
No, Michael.
The Spanish patrol boats with a customs crew aboard leave Vigo each day at dusk. With their radar, they're looking for the small, fast-moving contacts that could identify a smuggler's launch returning from a pickup out at sea. With a 2,000-horsepower engine at 55 knots, they're a match for even the fastest contraband vessel. These two turned out to be lobster fishermen.
The odds against seizing even a tenth of this drug traffic remain stacked against the authorities. You have a rugged coastline that can never really be properly policed, plus an existing network of highly skilled smugglers. A combination that forms a potential beachhead for the cocaine offensive in Western Europe. Peter Sharp, News at 10 in Vigo, northern Spain.
Here, hundreds of haemophiliacs are suing the government for compensation after contracting the AIDS virus from contaminated blood supplies. Lawyers representing 500 sufferers say the government didn't warn haemophiliacs soon enough that some blood from overseas could be infected.
Brian Smith is dying from AIDS. He's often too weak to go out and knows he'll never see his grandchildren grow up. He's among 1,200 haemophiliacs infected with the AIDS virus through the blood clotting agent factor VIII. His wife Margaret fears she may have injected the contaminated dose.
I gave Brian quite a lot of injections. At the time that we discovered Brian was HIV positive, and it makes you feel, did I give him this? You know, did I inject the contaminated factor VIII into him?
Brian feels suffering from haemophilia is enough of a burden.
Why should you deserve a thing like this? I mean, after all, I mean, I cope with haemophilia, but in fact, you've got no other chance when I was small. You just put up with it. But when you got this on top, well, it really knocks home to you.
The haemophiliacs now suing the government claim Britain relied too heavily on American imports, where blood donors are paid. They say ministers ignored critical medical warnings.
I'm appalled that by 1977-78, when it must have been clear as daylight to the Department of Health that we were not being self-sufficient, and the House of Commons would be informed that we would be self-sufficient, that they didn't either tell the House of Commons or find the extra capital money.
Many victims were children, their parents angry that compensation isn't automatic. This bedroom belongs to a 7-year-old who contracted AIDS.
It wouldn't be fair to tell him until it's absolutely necessary. That would be a mental torment on top of the physical one. No, it's our secret. It's our life, the way we live. We live a lie.
Lawyers representing the haemophiliacs were told today that it wouldn't be until 1991 that a full trial could begin. By that time, it's widely recognised that many of the claimants will already have died. Libby Vina, News at 10 at the High Court.
A former director of public prosecutions has said that there's enough evidence to prosecute 3 people in Britain for alleged war crimes. Sir Thomas Hetherington told the conference of leading Nazi hunters today that investigations against over 70 others were also needed. MPs are preparing to vote next month on whether to change the law so that the prosecutions can go ahead.
Two sisters who were wrongly accused of cheating Tesco of £2 got a public apology from the supermarket today and revised damages of £15,000 between them from the appeal court. An earlier court hearing had offered them £800 each. Anne Chastel and Francis Warby were accused 5 years ago of switching a price label from a toaster in a Tesco store whilst doing their Christmas shopping. Today they said the apology meant more than the money.
Cheers. Cheers. In a London hotel tonight, the sisters were toasting the success of their 5-year legal battle to clear their names. But even though the charges against them were dropped long ago, they were never until today given an apology or the chance to prove their innocence.
The terrible thing is, although you're not guilty, you feel guilty with this slur over you, and that's all that we ever asked for, was this apology.
An apology.
And when it came today, that was it. It was
unbelievable.
totally over, and that was marvellous. Yeah. Because it's a marvellous feeling, actually, when you have taken on a multi-million-pound concern and you have beaten them, for them to have stood up and said, I'm sorry. That, in actual fact, is a marvellous thing.
Yeah, that's all that we wanted, was those words that are hard to say. I find them hard to say myself at times. I'm sorry.
If they'd lost the fight, the sisters faced legal bills of £50,000. But at their homes in Hertfordshire tonight, where a welcome party is planned, the thoughts are only on the words they've been waiting 5 years to hear.
A former detective charged with demanding more than £1 million in blackmail from the Heinz Food Company has been remanded in custody. Rodney Witchelow from Essex appeared before Marylebone magistrates in London. He was arrested by former crime squad colleagues investigating the contamination of Heinz baby food.
Horse racing's most famous fence has undergone a facelift. Officials at Aintree today unveiled the new Beecher's Brook. They say it's safer for the horses and riders, but Red Rum's trainer said it's still going to take a brave horse to do it.
Beecher's Brook has always excited the racegoer, but this year the price of that excitement was the death of 2 horses. Over the past 20 years, 6 horses have died attempting to make the jump. A 10-foot drop onto sloping turf presented even the bravest horse with a fearsome challenge. Today's alterations mean the height of the fence remains as it was, a daunting 4 foot 10 inches. The changes come on the landing side of the jump. The slope that always threatened to push fallers back into the ditch has been filled in, and the ditch itself has been made shallower. There are changes too to the outside of the course. Before, horses had to jump at an angle, so running the risk of being distracted by the crowd. Now the course has been reshaped. A new rail will allow horses to jump the fences on the outside and continue straight before turning. But will the changes take away from the thrill of the National?
It's still a big fence with a big drop at a quaint angle, particularly leading into the next fence. I mean, the jockey's got to get it right. Horses will still fall here. But hopefully the element of injury risk has been taken away.
Officials hope that the alterations will maintain the excitement of the jump, but substantially reduce the risk of one of the world's classic races.
Soccer and a surprise in the Littlewoods Cup third round, Tranmere Rovers 3, Millwall 2. The main points of the news again. London ambulance service is tonight virtually paralysed. The first day of the work to rule, coupled with a national overtime ban over pay, has closed nearly every ambulance station in London. Mrs. Thatcher and her Foreign Secretary John Major were tonight standing firmly behind their go-it-alone stance on sanctions against South Africa. The Prime Minister said she was appalled at the reaction of Commonwealth leaders who accused her of dirty tricks because she issued a separate statement on sanctions after signing an agreed declaration. And more than 7,000 engineering workers of the British Aerospace and Rolls-Royce are being called out on indefinite strike from Monday. The action is over their claim for a 35-hour working week for 2 million workers throughout the industry.
And that's news at 10. From Trevor and me, a very good night to you.
Good evening. Well, after today's rather placid weather across the country, things are going to heat up a little bit for tomorrow. Out to the northwest here we have quite a vigorous frontal system here, and that'll be rushing across the Atlantic, bringing wet and windy weather into the northern half of Britain for tomorrow. But to begin with, let's start with tonight. There's still a little chance of some rain in the southeast, and there's still some showers up in the northwest. But for the most part, these are going to die out. For many of us, a dry night. You have a little chilly one, particularly, I think, in the Peak District, where it could get as low as 4, which is cool enough to give you a touch of ground frost, and a few fog patches forming too. But towards the end of the night, the first signs of that cloud and rain coming in from the west. So tomorrow starts for us then, for much of the country, fine and dry. The rain up to the northwest, already first thing in the morning, and then fairly quickly across Scotland and Northern Ireland in the morning, and then rather more slowly through the afternoon down across Northern England and into North Wales by the time the sun goes down. A little bit brighter perhaps in the Western Isles by the time the day is finished. Further south though, along southern counties of England, it should stay dry through the day, if increasingly cloudy. Temperatures tomorrow, much like today in the south, 17 is 63, but a very windy weather up in the northwest, 13 is 55, feeling chilly, and those winds strong enough to give some gales, particularly I think in the Western Isles. Well, that's it from me for tonight. Here's the summary.
Good evening. Rolls-Royce workers in Coventry have rejected calls for strike action over their union's national campaign for a shorter working week. The Parkside factory was one of 7 engineers